all gathered right there. Dear friends, we gather this afternoon to remember and to celebrate the life of one who filled our world with his love, his goodness, his unique spirit, and outstanding example. In gratitude and humility, we turn to the wisdom of our tradition for comfort, for guidance, and for understanding. Throughout the centuries, whenever our people felt at a loss, confused, grieving, in need of direction, in need of guidance and comfort, they would turn to the Psalms. Psalm 121 was a particularly beloved one. As Sa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and of earth. Sa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Sa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. Sa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are as a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, Return, O mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted, and behold the upright. They shall have peace. For those of you for whom the 23rd Psalm is familiar, I invite you to join with me in its recitation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When I die, remember me with a smile and laughter. If thoughts of me provoke no love, only sadness and tears, I ask that I be soon forgotten. Give what's left of me away to children and old ones who wait to die. And if you must cry, cry for your brother or sister who walks in grief beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give to me. You can love me most by letting love live within the circle of your arms, embracing the frightened ones. Love doesn't die. people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. My dear Laurie and Richard, Roger and Stephanie, dear Lisa and Kobe, dear grandchildren, family, dear friends, there are many ways in which we might think of Henry Edheimer. He was bold, assertive, a go-getter kind of person. He was opinionated, forward and confident. He was generous, caring, compassionate. He loved his family more than life itself and knew how lucky he was to have found Joyce and to have created a life together of which they were both justly proud. He was tenacious, determined, energetic, and vital to the very end of his life. He was smart, sharp, astute, and discerning. He was also unabashed, could be inappropriate, and was generally unfiltered. He was witty and humorous, and not afraid to be outrageous. He was not shy, retiring, or reserved. He was a friendly, outgoing person, especially if he liked you. Henry Edheimer was a presence. We knew where we stood with him. We knew what animated him and brought him joy. He was also not reticent about irritations or things that did not interest him. He was undaunted. He was unique. He was a character, an original, a one of a kind, a personality. Or, as he would have said, in confirmation of our many perceptions of him, he was one hell of a guy. In fact, this hell of a guy's hell of a life began in a literally hell of a way. Henry was born Hans Heinrich Edheimer on August 6, 1933, in Binau, Germany. The youngest of Max and Lucy Edheimer's two children, the oldest of whom, Henry's sister Bertha, or Bertie as she was called, was born 7 years earlier. The year of Henry's birth and the place telegraphs to us immediately the looming difficulties the family would have to face. His parents realized fairly early on that something sinister was brewing. In 1936, they knew something was wrong when they would walk down the street and the neighbors would close their curtains. They made the very difficult decision to leave. Max had a successful business, and when he hesitated, Lucy made things very clear. We're going with you or without you. And they came to Lucy's brothers in Cleveland. Henry's grandparents chose not to leave, and while they wrote for a time after the family left, their letters ominously stopped eventually. We can never know what Henry's life might have been like without the disruption of his earliest years, or his father's bitter disappointment at having to do menial factory work instead of running his own company and reaping the material benefits of his entrepreneurship. The loss of stature and loss of personal agency were exceedingly hard on Max. He did the right thing, but he and his family suffered for it. He also sustained the disapproval of his co-workers, who told him to slow down his productivity as he was making them look bad at the factory. For his part, Henry acknowledged that his childhood was not filled with happy memories. They lived at Mayfield and Coventry and Cleveland Heights, so Bertie and Henry had the advantage of going to the Cleveland Heights schools and Heights High, where Henry played basketball for the school team and played tennis at Kane Park. He especially loved tennis. In fact, family lore maintains that he was almost late to his wedding because he was engaged in a tennis match, while a real love match awaited him. In later years, when Henry wasn't playing anymore, he and Joyce enjoyed spectator sports, although it was frequently Joyce who could get most worked up and yell at the television while Henry fell asleep. They were remarkably well matched, no matter what they were doing. When Henry went to college, he went first to Bowling Green. Sadly, his mother Lucy passed away while he was there, and Henry transferred to Kent State to be closer to home during this difficult time. In characteristic fashion, he maintained that he had a 4-point average in college, 1 point for freshman year, 1 point for sophomore year. You get the idea. He also said, and these are his words, I am quoting, he received his BS degree and his BA degree in bullshit and business administration, respectively. He was a hell of a guy. As much as he might joke about his own academic career, education was very important to him, which meant that his children and grandchildren all had to go to college. It was when he went to work that Henry changed his name from, to him, the embarrassing German Hans, to the American Henry. As he shed his old world name, he seemed to come into his own in other ways as well. He found that he was good at what he did, as he sold for Bauer and Black medical supplies, as he went to Boston for 6 months, and then returned to Cleveland to represent several companies, particularly for stationery, office, and school supplies. He became a national sales manager for Dymo and moved to Chicago until he was ready to move back to Cleveland with his young family and open his own business, Henry Edheimer and Associates, as a manufacturer's representative for 20 different companies. It was almost as if he was finally able to exorcise his father's demons that plagued Max with such a sense of injury and anger by redeeming the family name with a new Edheimer business that could flourish and succeed in a very different political climate, in a different time, in a different country. There was one more adjustment Henry had to make in order to shed the old world residuals that constrained him. When he met Joyce, he not only met the love of his life, he found a family that could embrace him with the warmth and closeness he craved. He kept tabs on his sister Bertie and her husband Eric Schwartz, with their children Lindy, Jack, and Gary, but they lived in Ottawa, Ohio, and didn't see much of each other. Joyce brought into Henry's life her parents, David and Gertrude Leisman, as well as her younger sister, Linda and Gary Melcher, Zichrono Livracha, with Chip, Bobby, and Jennifer, and now their families, which include Alice, Melissa, and Joshua, as well as Edward, Cole, Lex, Reese, Addie, Leo, Reef, and Eliana. It was with Joyce and her family that Henry developed his own fierce loyalty to and love for his family. He had always stayed close to his loved ones and knew from his immigrant experience how important family was. But with Joyce, he finally found happiness as well, a happiness that for the first time in his life centered on his family, as Henry and Joyce welcomed Lori, Roger, and Lisa into their hearts and their life as the 3 greatest treasures of their life. There were times when Henry could not believe how fortunate he was, when his heart swelled with love for the people around him. As a dad, he was something of a softie or a pushover, while Joyce was the stricter parent. But as Lori, Roger, and Lisa all affirm, they were both very much on the same page. They thought alike about most issues and prided themselves that they didn't fight. Of course, when Joyce went back to work to help Henry after the children were older, there was that bad day for Henry that resulted in a disagreement with Joyce. It ended when Henry yelled at her to just go home. That night at dinner, everything seemed perfectly fine, but the next day, Joyce did not come in for work. Henry called. Joyce responded, "You fired me, and I quit." He called again, and nothing changed. The third time he called, he said, "I'm sorry." Joyce replied, "I can't hear you. What did you say?" Henry replied, with full voice and full heart, "I'm sorry." When Laurie, Roger, and Lisa were growing up, Grandma Gertrude Leisman ensured that the family would be together every Friday night and for the Jewish holidays. When she passed away, Joyce and Linda took over Friday nights. Sometimes it was at Joyce and Henry's, and sometimes it was at Linda and Gary's, and eventually it moved to Sunday nights. But the family always gathered. It was that important. Henry and Joyce always took their kids on vacations. Sometimes they were last-minute drives to Florida and then a cruise to Acapulco. They loved to be together and enjoyed whatever the family might be doing, whether traveling, eating, playing, or just hanging out. For years, the family gathered for Thanksgiving at Aunt Linda's, and then the very next night, whatever the calendar might say, they gathered for Hanukkah at Joyce and Henry's house. Gatherings are harder now that the family lives in so many places, but those bonds of closeness are still strong and firm. Henry, with Joyce, was delighted when Laurie married Richard and brought Sammy, now with Connor and little Clay, into the family. When Roger found his Stephanie, and when Lisa married Kobe, each of his children's spouses became a child of his heart, never a child-in-law. And his life expanded with joy and meaning when his grandchildren started to arrive. Emily, now with Alex Perlman and 5-month Yehuda, Allison and her partner Justin Weber, Matthew and Daniel, Ariel, Michael, Devin, and Garrett. Henry adored his grandchildren. When he and Joyce became snowbirds in Wellington, Florida, they bought a home that was large enough for the family to visit, as they wanted to be sure to keep the family together. They attended their grandchildren's special events, birthdays, programs, concerts, and graduations. The last event Henry attended was Devin's high school graduation on May 27th. It was important to him to be present whenever he could, and whenever there was something to celebrate in any of their lives. He also remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every milestone, and every Hanukkah with a gift of money. He would always ask, even in the hospital, he would ask his children and grandchildren, "Are you okay? Do you need anything? Do you need money?" He was generous and caring and concerned. He wanted the 3 siblings to stay close and made sure they all traveled together in pursuit of that goal. They did trips to the Outer Banks, to the house in Florida, the house in Cleveland, to all be together. It didn't have to be exotic. It just needed to happen. About 11 years ago, the then 16 of them all went on a cruise together. Laurie referred to it as the drug cartel cruise that took them to Haiti, Cozumel, and Jamaica. It was Emily's 18th birthday, Henry's 80th, and his and Joyce's 55th wedding anniversary. They loved being together and have only fond memories of that experience. When he was in the hospital, Henry expressed regret that he would not be able to see Yehuda grow up. He also wanted to tell all of his grandchildren to be happy and have a good life. It's been wonderful years and also beautiful years for him. Enjoy your life and think of Joyce and myself watching out for all of you. Love, Grandpa, and most important, Grandma. He was a hell of a guy. The first time he ever saw her was at a Howard Johnson's. He caught sight of her beautiful blue eyes and thought, that woman is for me. They actually met, subsequent to that initial sighting, at a dear friend of Joyce's, Sue Weinstein's parents' house. Henry couldn't remember why they were both there, but he vividly remembered how powerfully he was drawn to her and continued to be every day of their far too brief 59 years together. They were lovers, partners, teammates, friends. They shared a magnificent life together for which Henry could not have been more grateful and about which he could never say enough. He knew how lucky he was to have found her. As he put it, she had everything I didn't deserve. She never asked for anything and never wanted anything for herself. She didn't have an unkind bone in her body. I loved everything about her, and whatever I did was somehow good enough for her. They raised a beautiful family together. They worked extremely well together and built a good business. They traveled to Europe, Israel, Hawaii. They went to dinner with friends and always loved being with family. Linda was always a special presence in their lives when Joyce was alive, since her passing, and during these last days of Henry's unexpected decline. As devastating as was the loss of Joyce, the family is exceedingly grateful, as was Henry, for Sandy Stern's loving presence and loving companionship in his life. She made it fun to go out and to enjoy each other and all that life might offer them. Henry knew how lucky he was. Great communicator that he was, he spoke openly about his thoughts and feelings, as when he told Kobe, I love you. You're a sweet guy. You deserve the best. He could have said those same words, and either did verbally or through his actions, to every member of his family. Of course, he also threatened to send Kobe back to Israel with a one-way ticket. When Henry was just now in the hospital, Kobe told him, I'm still waiting for my ticket, Henry. He was a hell of a guy. At 90 years old, he was independent, in full command of his mental faculties. Just 2 days before he died, he was asking about the stock market. He never wanted to be a burden. As Laurie said, in the end, it was his body, not his spirit, that failed. There is no question in anyone's mind that, as Lisa said, we had incredible parents, and we can imagine them even now, holding hands again. Even as Lisa and Laurie were stalwart companions to him in these last days of his life, and as Roger was in constant touch, it was clear that he lived his life as he wanted. He departed this life as he wanted. He will be remembered as he wanted, as one hell of a guy. Zichrono livracha. May his memory rest always as a blessing upon us. And let us say, Amen. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be. To be and oh, to lose, a thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. I call now on Roger to share some of his thoughts on behalf of himself and his family.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It means a lot to our family, and certainly would have meant a lot to Henry. He would have been very happy today to see everybody here. It's kind of a difficult speech for me to give, and the reason I say that is for the last 40 years or more, the best stories I can tell, or my favorite stories, were all about Henry that probably would not be appropriate for today. It seemed like every time I got together with family members or people that knew Henry, I would always start off the conversation by saying, "You won't believe what Henry said or did," and then continue with the story, and there was usually laughter. It was so easy for me to talk about a guy that was very confident, fearless, had absolutely zero patience, and would question everything that came up during the day in such a funny way. It'd be so easy for me to say my dad was just like Larry David in the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. But for some reason, that doesn't sound right to me. It sounds better if I said the reverse, which was Larry David was just like Henry. When it came to being a character, Henry really didn't take a back seat to anybody. He would just say and do things that most of us just thought about saying or doing, or probably wouldn't even think about at all. Henry was very much involved in our lives. It's going to be difficult to move forward without him. My friend, my mentor, my dad, he'd call every single day. Same conversation. How's the weather? Complaining about the stock market. But the real purpose of the call was he just wanted to make sure that everybody was doing well. And if something wasn't right, he wanted to be that guy to fix things. Over the years, I became very cautious of what to tell my dad when we had these daily conversations. Like, for example, one time he calls up and says, "What's going on?" And I said, "Not too much, but I'm just waiting around for the plumber to show up. I have a little bit of leaking in my kitchen." Within 5 minutes, I have some guy from Cleveland calling me up all excited, saying, "I'm a plumber. I know your dad from Corky's. He told me you have an emergency and your house is flooded." So that was Henry. It's difficult for me to share anything about Henry that you already do not know. If you had a 5-minute conversation with Henry over the years, or if you know him for 50 years, the guy, he liked to talk about himself, but he wasn't shy about doing it. He didn't have any secrets, and he was pretty much an open book. But more importantly, he just enjoyed a good conversation. He loved talking to people. He asked a lot of questions. Every time he had a conversation, he always asked that question by saying, "If you don't mind me asking," and then he would ask the question, always, every time. But as a kid, I always thought it was normal every time we went out for dinner to a restaurant that we always had the same occurrence, and I always thought it was normal. The occurrence was after dinner, we all would head to the car or leave the restaurant, and Henry would always lag behind and pay the bill. And we get to the car, it was my mother and my sisters, and no Henry. We wait there 5, 10, 15 minutes, sometimes in the freezing cold. Finally, my mom would get so upset, I would have to go back into the restaurant. And there was Henry, deep in conversation with a busboy, a waitress, another customer, anybody he can find to have a conversation with. The guy, he was the king of the conversation. When you spoke to him, there was never that awkward moment at all. He knew how to talk to people. Henry was very fortunate to have found the perfect partner in his life, which is my mother. She was a saint, the lady. But life worked for them. They enjoyed life together, spending time together. I think they both had the same philosophy in life, which was do the right thing, be honest, look out for the next generation, have good friends, and be respectful of money. That was very important for them. In fact, when it came to saving money, they even had a saying for it, which was, "It's not the distance that you go for the deal, it's the deal you get when you get there." It was not unusual for them to drive across Cleveland to find cherries at 39 cents a pound or find gasoline at 99 cents a gallon back in the day. But after Henry's passing, we were very concerned about Henry and how he would move forward without my mother, but he was very fortunate to have found Sandy Stern, a special lady, a beautiful lady, and the rest of her family that Henry could not say enough good things about. You made him feel very comfortable, and we appreciate that. Henry was a very successful businessman. As the saying goes, if you love your job, you never have to work a day in your life. That was Henry. When I first started working, I called up Henry one day and I said, "Dad, what do you love about work so much?" And without even pausing, he says, "The opportunity to wake up every morning and have the chance to win or lose." Henry was a perfect salesman. He loved people. People loved him. Passionate about his products. The guy loved the challenge, and he was relentless. but most importantly, he was a fair guy that always had the customer's best interest at heart. Henry had all kinds of friends from all aspects of his life. He kept in touch with everybody, old neighbors, high school friends, old business associates. If you were a friend of the Henrys, you were a friend of the Henrys for life. And after one of his friends passed away, he would always make that effort to try to stay connected with the rest of the family. Henry was a great guy, a fair guy. So many times over the years where somebody lost their job and were down on their luck, Henry would always reach out on his network to try to help them out. When someone was having financial problems, Henry was always there to help out. And when he knew somebody that was sick, Henry would always continue to call to the very end of the person's life to try to lift their spirits. My dad was really a special guy with a great heart, a true Hall of Famer in so many ways, a father, a husband, a businessman, a friend, a guy who kept track of wins and losses, and in the game of life, he definitely won the game. Before I leave you, I'll leave with one favorite story of Henry, my top 200 favorite stories. I think it's funny. Hopefully somebody else will think it's funny, but it doesn't offend anybody, which is kind of important. And the story goes, it's about 20 years ago. Henry's in his 70s, and I'm home for a weekend back in Cleveland, and there wasn't anything for lunch at the house, ready to have lunch. Henry says, I'll run out to the delicatessen, and I'll pick up some salami and some bagels, and I'll be back in 25 minutes. 25 minutes comes, and Henry comes bursting in the door, kind of like that TV character Kramer in Seinfeld. He says, you won't believe what happened. I can't believe it. And I said, Henry, you're only gone for 25 minutes. What possibly could have happened? Did they catch you stealing the newspaper from the delicatessen? He's like, no, don't be funny with me. And then he tells me a story where he's at the delicatessen, and he thinks he sees his good friend Elliot there, and his back is towards him. So Henry wants to walk up and surprise him, and right when he gets there, his good friend Elliot, he thinks his good friend Elliot is leaning down to pick up the rye bread. So Henry goes up and puts him in a headlock and says to the guy, he goes, Elliot, who is it? And the guy says, you are so strong, and my name is Sam, not Elliot. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for that wonderfully evocative, those wonderfully evocative memories of your dad. I call now on the Edheimer grandchildren, who will share some of their recollections with us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily. I'm Henry's oldest grandchild. I was fortunate to speak with my grandfather quite often, and he'd always ask me about work, my husband, my baby, and different things, the weather, and most of the time, he'd like to mention my grandmother and how she was the love of his life, and she was quite a lady. And I remember when, and I think from that conversation, it became clear to me, their marriage was very special. She was very special to him. And I remember a few years ago when she passed away, people said, oh no, Henry, what's he going to do? He doesn't know how to do anything. He doesn't know how to use a microwave or a stove. But really, how I saw that is, how clear it was, how dedicated my grandmother was to my grandfather. In the past year and a half, I'm very grateful my grandfather was able to attend both my wedding and the bris of my first baby. And when I'd speak to my grandfather, he liked to say to me, Emily, I hope the world is as nice to you as you are to the world. And I'm not sure that I'm so nice to the world, but how I hear that is, I hope I can be nice to my world. And it's in my grandparents' merit that I hope I can be as dedicated to the people I love as my grandparents were clearly dedicated to one another. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael, another one of Henry's grandchildren. I feel very fortunate enough to be able to spend a fairly decent amount of time with my grandpa the last few years since Joyce passed away. And because of this, I was able to make a lot of great memories and different kind of mental tokens that I'll cherish for the rest of my life and hopefully be able to pass on to my grandchildren one day as well. Just last week, we were sitting with him in the Cleveland Clinic at the hospital. He wasn't doing well. We were just talking, watching CNBC, of course. And all of a sudden, he kind of has this attack, coughing and wheezing. You couldn't really understand him for maybe about 10 seconds. And right afterwards, he looks at me and says, "Michael, I think my basketball career may be over now." and he always seemed to have this big presence in the room, and he was this light, even if he wasn't even saying anything. If you didn't know Henry, you were probably living under a rock. And just last May, a few months ago, when we were leaving Florida to go back to Cleveland for the summertime, we passed by the cafe in the community for him to say goodbye to all his buddies. And the second we walked into the cafe and opened the doors, the whole entire place stood up and started shaking his hand and hugging him. And it was amazing to see how many people cared and would miss him over the summer. And I just thought to myself, how can I make this many friends like my grandpa? And even that, as kind of my dad talked about, he was such a great conversationalist. He could walk into the hot tub with some random guy that he's never met in Florida, and about an hour later, they would walk out, and it seemed like they were best friends for the last 80 years. But besides being a great friend and husband and father, he was an unbelievable grandfather. First of all, he was extremely present with every single person in the family's life. I remember he would call me. I'd be sitting in the library or something studying, and he'd say, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm studying for an exam next week." And then we'd talk probably a couple weeks, maybe a month later, and he'd said, "How was the exam, by the way?" I completely forgot about it, let alone my 90-year-old grandpa remembered it. So it was pretty amazing. And second of all, as we've touched a lot upon, is that he really valued hard work and money. Anyone who's ever been to dinner with him knows that it was a prerequisite to look at the coupon book right before you went. And, of course, scan the check at the end of the meal like it was some sort of sacred scroll. And even he would joke around. I was just talking to my cousin Devin, who would wear kind of all the girls wear those ripped jeans. Those are the trendy things. He said, maybe next year for Hanukkah, I'll get you some jeans from Costco and make some holes in them myself. But yeah, he showed us that the importance of, you got to respect the dollar. He showed us how important it is to have a good GPA and just keep on working hard because, quite frankly, he came from a small town right outside of Mosbach, Germany, and came here, worked hard, made a family. It was kind of a great example of the American dream, but not to get too patriotic there. And finally, he showed us how to love your family and your friends. He never really told us how exactly, but just by watching him, a few times a year, the way he would talk to Joyce and the way he'd call all of us, and it was a pretty amazing thing, and I think we can all learn a lot from Henry.
Thank you. We have a few more grandchildren to hear from. The Shaw and the Avramovitz grandchildren will now share some thoughts with us.
Hi, I'm Ariel, one of Henry's many grandchildren we have up here. Henry was truly a man like no other. He was an amazing grandfather to all of us. And whenever we needed advice or just a laugh, you would call him. He would be there, pick up, maybe not on the first ring, or the first try, but he would. Or he'd give you a call back right after. He was someone we all looked up to and will deeply miss. His love for all of us was infectious and never went unnoticed. No words will ever be able to express how much we will miss him and love him. Thank you.
He was truly, hi, I'm Devin. He was truly the best grandpa I could have ever asked for, and I'll really miss our 30-second conversations on the phone. They were the best conversations I could ask for.
They are all here in special tribute to a special man. Thank you. Oh God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way. But you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures, as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. Please rise. מלא רחמים שוכן במרומי המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה עם קדושים וטהורים כזור רקיע מזהירים את נשמת היקר שלנו שהלך לעולמו בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרו חיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Henry Edheimer, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
We're going to come forward. We're going to follow right way your cars are right outside these doors right here. Right this way, everybody. Interment will take place at Mayfield Cemetery. Those going to the cemetery with the family, please step directly to your cars. Start your cars, turn on your headlights and your four-way flashers. You can exit to the rear or the front of the chapel at this time, please.
I know. I was looking for my daughter. I don't know. I guess they should. No, my sister's. Mortality